evening, and welcome to another episode of Unfinished Business. I am Rogette Harris, and I always look forward to our conversations every week. Every week, we take a journey through the news of the day and current events. Tonight's guest is Jeffrey Lord, Fox News Republican analyst and my weekly debate partner on Penn Live's Battleground PA podcast. Tonight's topic is on race and politics. Race has always been a defining issue in American politics, a dividing line marked by centuries of struggle, conflict, and misunderstanding. The story of how the Republican Party, once the party of Abraham Lincoln, became almost entirely dependent on white voters, and how the Democratic Party, once the party of Southern segregationists, is now the political home to Black Americans and many other racial minorities, has been years in the making. 2020 has been a year of unpredictability. However, two very specific events has captured this moment. The coronavirus pandemic, which has disproportionately killed Black and Brown Americans, and it also exposed a broader range of inequities that persist in these communities. The recession that has accompanied the pandemic has also highlighted similar inequities. And the brutal killing of George Floyd by police in Minneapolis has finally prompted many white Americans to acknowledge that their lives are profoundly different from those of Black and Brown Americans, and that racism is part of that lived experience, not counting the polarization of the US political system. When polls show that 2 in 3 Americans now say that they support the Black Lives Matter movement, when thousands of Americans of all races and ages march together in protest against police brutality, when the National Football League reverses its position on players kneeling during the national anthem, when Mississippi eliminates the Confederate symbol from its flag, there seems little question that for now, this is a different moment. And maybe for once, we will finally get some substantive social and policy change since the civil rights movement in the 1960s, which produced landmark legislation. However, minorities continue to face discrimination in virtually all aspects of life. Economic gains for many Black Americans are undeniable, yet huge disparities in jobs, housing, income, education, and wealth still exist. These are just some of the topics we will tackle in tonight's show. Please subscribe to watch our weekly show on YouTube at Rogette Harris, and you can also find us on any platform that you listen to for your podcasts. Let's get busy and solve some unfinished business. Good evening, everyone, and welcome to another episode of Unfinished Business. Tonight, we have a very special guest. I brought on my debate partner from Battleground PA, Jeffrey Lord, who you can often see on Fox News. We are going to talk tonight about race and American politics. And as Jeffrey and the rest of you know, I always looked at racism as sort of the original pandemic of the United States. Although things have improved, obviously we can't deny that. There's still a long way to go. So thank you first for coming on the show to discuss this issue. As you know, it's a very sensitive issue. And I do want to discuss this with you with an open mind, and hopefully you will have one as well.
All right. I am ready to go. Let's have fun. Boy, Rogette, you know, the fact that you and I think discussing issues like this is fun says a lot about us.
It does. Good, bad, or indifferent.
Exactly.
I actually wish we had more discussions like this overall, but in a better tone. I think it would solve a lot.
Yes.
One ways that we do disagree is, to me, racism is not a political issue in the sense that I believe that both sides, Democrats, Republicans, and any other party, the Bull Moose Party, any other party that we've had throughout history has played a part in. I believe it's more of an American problem more so than a specific political party issue. Now, you believe that the Democrat Party, which we can't deny, was the originators of the slave trade and whatnot. But I would argue that things switched in the mid 1960s, which we can get more into. And now, currently, we talk about identity politics. For me, identity politics is more that each particular group has issues that are important to them. But I do agree that some politicians use identity politics to divide. What is your position on identity politics?
Okay. Well, not for nothing do I call it the son of segregation. And to give your viewers and listeners a feel for where I am on all of this. When the United States was formed formally in the writing of the Constitution in 1787, as you know, there were no political parties mentioned in the Constitution. They evolved naturally. And the Democratic Party is generally considered to be America's oldest political party. The Federalists were there for a while, and then the Federalists went extinct. So it was the Democrats sort of dominating the situation. And history tells us that the Democratic Party was formed by slave owners. They were the first political party to write a political platform. They began doing that in 1840, and that was about 16 years before the Republican Party even existed. And in writing those platforms, the first 5 or 6 flatly supported slavery. I mean, it's right out there. You can go to I think it's the University of California, it's Santa Barbara, and they have a whole website which publishes all of the Democratic platforms, all of the Republican platforms, various presidential speeches, and all of this kind of thing. It's the kind of thing it's built for geeks like us to just sit there and go through them endlessly. So on one occasion, years ago, I made a list of why I came to this belief. And what got me started was I checked the party history section of the Democratic National Committee's website. And they were portraying themselves as the party of civil rights. And I knew this was factually not correct. So I made a list. The Democratic Party had 6 platforms from 1840 to 1860 that supported slavery. There were 7 Democrat presidents who owned slaves. There were 20 platforms that from 1868 forward that either supported segregation outright or were silent on the subject. The Democratic website was silent about the party's role in creating Jim Crow laws. The Ku Klux Klan, historians say, was, and I'm quoting from a Columbia University historian, Eric Foner, was, quote, a military force serving the interests of the Democratic Party, unquote. And another historian from the University of North Carolina describes the Klan as the, quote, terrorist arm of the Democratic Party, unquote. I could go on and on and on and on, but we'd bore the whole audience and they'd leave. So we don't want to do that. The one last thing I would say is that they opposed the 13th, 14th, and 15th Amendments to the Constitution. The 13th Amendment banned slavery. The 14th overturned the infamous Dred Scott decision. And the 15th gave African Americans the right to vote. My point is, in all of this and in all of the civil rights laws that were passed over their objection in the 1860s and 70s, effectively, Democrats became what I call the party of race. And identity politics fits exactly into that mold. In other words, we're not to be judged as individuals. We're to be judged by what group we belong to. And this is a bad habit in America. And frankly, it doesn't always have to do with black and white issues of race. When the Irish, all of them white, first showed up in America, no Irish need apply, and they were discriminated against. Then there was a wave of immigration from Italy, and it was the same thing with Italians. When
But
I
you're forgetting about it, assimilation now. That's sort of the difference. So European groups are able to assimilate
Well,
more.
that's my point, is that we should be able to assimilate everybody, regardless of color. And when we single them out by group, we are fighting assimilation.
But we're singled out naturally. For instance, and we had this discussion before as well. You look at me, you see a black woman. I look at you, I can't tell if you're German. I can't tell if you're English. And this is where, things kind of switch. I can't deny the history that you gave, obviously, with how the parties start. The difference is, I don't believe that the Democratic nor the Republican Party is the same. Both have evolved over the years. And, to give you an example, and you like history, but as you know, perception started to change in the 60s. It was around the 60s where the Democratic Party, because of Lyndon B. Johnson supporting the Civil Rights Act and pushing that through, especially with John F. Kennedy, who was a Democrat. And I know you're from Boston, so you're
I'm from Northampton, Massachusetts, but I am a
Massachusetts, so
big
you're
Kennedy
familiar
fan.
with the Kennedys. But that's when things started to change, and you started to see the perceptions in society, seeing the Democrat Party as more progressive on civil rights, especially your candidate for president at that time, as Senator Barry Goldwater, actually voted against the Civil Rights Act. Lyndon B. Johnson, as the president, because of the assassination of John F. Kennedy, supported and signed into law. So that's where you see a lot of the shift. Now, does that mean that the Democrat Party does everything that they should do for people of color? I'm not going to say that. I'll give you an example. I don't know if I ever told you this story, but I did my undergrad at the University of Pittsburgh. And I ran for president of the University of Pittsburgh Democrats. The individual that I ran for was a white male. We were in the same class, but his father was a previous elected official. So he had connections with the state Democratic Party.
Ah,
I beat him by 5 to 7 votes. So it was very, very close. I had a very high ranking elected official within the Democrat Party on the state level come to me and ask me if I would share the position that I won as president with this other individual. And the reason I was given was it would be for the good of the party. Now, I decided not to do that. So this individual started his own Democrat Party within the university, and the state Democrat Party acknowledged them. It took me a long time to realize what the good of the party meant. All I knew was I won this election fair and square, and I knew if the roles were reversed, he would not have been asked to have shared his title with me. So, I'm not saying that the Democrat Party is perfect, but when you have your current president, who is obviously ahead of the Republican Party, who started his career on the birther movement, and I know you'll go back to the 1800s with that as well. But the point is, regardless of who does this, it's wrong. And he started his political career on claiming that Barack Obama was not an American citizen. That's how he started. So, as a Black American, when you see that, you're not going to join a party that immediately looks at people of color as not Americans.
well, wow, where to start here? First of all, let me say this about Senator Goldwater. Senator Goldwater, first of all, was the heir to the Goldwater department store fortunes, and was a very strong civil rights leader in the state of Arizona. He was a major general, I believe, in the Arizona National Guard, and he played a serious role in getting Arizona National Guard desegregated. He voted for the civil rights laws of 1957 and I think 1960. He did vote against the 1964 civil rights bill. My eighth grade self was vociferously opposed to him because of that. I was on the LBJ debate side in my eighth grade situation. And somewhere in the family, I still have my LBJ hat, as a matter of fact, cowboy hat in the other room. And there's a picture of the family archives of me wearing the hat, holding up an LB all the way with LBJ button in front of my picture of John F. Kennedy. So, but I do want to say seriously about Senator Goldwater. Senator Goldwater was a libertarian. He was like Rand Paul today.
Okay.
And the Republican platform of 1964 specifically supported the Civil Rights Law of 1964. Goldwater took a lot of criticism. I think he should have taken a lot of criticism for it. And that was sort of the end of it. The South, as you know, voted for Jimmy Carter. They voted for Bill Clinton.
Yeah, but they were Southerners as well.
Wow. Well, I mean, you can't, on the one hand, say that there was this big switch, except when they vote for Carter or Clinton or Barack Obama, who was not, I mean, Virginia, for example, voted for Barack Obama. He's not a Virginian. He's from Chicago.
Right, but you can't compare. Jimmy Carter and Bill Clinton actually won Southern, the Deep South states.
Well, so then what you're saying is that the Southern Democrats of the Carter and Clinton era were what? Race-oriented?
No, but you have to realize too, at least with Bill Clinton, when he ran, he kind of remolded himself as a quote new Democrat.
And do you know what his favorite phrase was that he used when he announced his speech? Make America great again.
A few different people have used that.
Yes, including Ronald Reagan.
Yes, a few people have used that. So basically you're saying politics don't always have the most original thoughts.
That's right. I remember the first time I talked to Donald Trump, and this is like we had our first conversation, I think, in 2013. And he said to me then, I'm thinking of, if I do this, I'm thinking of using the slogan, Make America Great Again. So I, of course, little geek that I was, went and looked it up. And sure enough, I mean, I think he truly didn't know that Bill Clinton or Ronald Reagan had used it. But I looked it up, and there was Bill Clinton announcing for president as governor of Arkansas, and that's what he says. And then years later, he goes on to attack, when Hillary is running, he goes on to attack Trump for saying it, and raises his eyebrows. Well, we all know what they really mean when they say this. Well, they mean the same thing as you did, President Clinton. So,
well, no, it's not exactly the same because of comments that the president makes. Like I said, he started his political career, and I'm not talking about the reality show, but his political career was started on claiming that Barack Obama was not an American.
well,
he started and it doesn't matter if other people, did that as well. It's wrong regardless. And he only picks out, people of color. We also can't ignore that whether it's right, wrong, and different, the Republican Party, for the most part, does depend almost entirely on white voters to get elected. The Democrat Party does need a large turnout of Black voters and other minorities to get elected. Now we can argue why that is, but it's true.
Well, let me
bring it up to current day real quick. Now, this coronavirus, in my opinion, has really opened up and shown to the world what a lot of us who are of a racial minority has been saying for years, that there are disparities in healthcare. We see that openly. You can no longer be denied that there is a digital divide with public schools, depending on where you live, where your zip code is. It has opened up a lot of the social norms. Now, the situation with George Floyd and the police accountability, that has been going on for a long time. But I do think because this newest generation is very racially mixed, that they're no longer standing for it as much, which is why you see the protests going on longer than they might have in the past. But when you look at these issues, neither party, and this is where maybe you and I might agree, I don't feel as though either party are really addressing these issues. Even when you talk about wage jobs, I always say this, it's not just having a job, it's the quality of the job. It's the salary of that job. It's can you live on that job and can you take care of your family on that job? A lot of people are working many, many jobs, numerous jobs to make ends meet. So yes, they're not going to be in the job numbers, whatnot. But if they lose one of those jobs, they're going to be evicted from their apartment. So it's also the quality of life as well.
Right, but as my old boss Jack Kemp would say, you have to work, save, invest with your money so that you can do exactly that and rise up through the ranks of whatever.
But you need access to opportunity as well. Depending on who you are, you don't always have access to opportunity.
Well, you got to have the jobs out there, and they have until the virus came along and decimated things. Thank you, China. You got to have these opportunities, and they've been provided.
But even when you do have opportunities, depending on who you are, and this is where you and I will probably disagree, you don't necessarily have access to them. You know, nowadays, a lot isn't what you know, it's who you know. And you don't always have access to who you know, because the higher up you go, the whiter and the more male it is. So you don't always have access to that. Even with education is supposed to be the big equalizer. But even African American with an education makes less money than a white male with a high school diploma. Now, is that true in every case? Of course, but it's true too often more than not. We just can't deny that you're treated differently depending on who you are.
Well, I mean, I think to some degree, human nature, everybody is going to be treated differently. Every single soul on planet Earth is going to have a different experience. I don't, I mean, one of the things that kind of bugs me in a minor sense, and this isn't limited to race, is the notion that equality of opportunity has to mean equality of outcome. And that just isn't going to happen under any circumstances. I can't do what you do. You can't do what I do. Neither one of us can do what a third person does. I mean,
I'm just arguing access. I'm arguing access.
Well, I'm all for access.
Outcome. Yeah, I'm arguing access. Everyone doesn't have the same access to opportunity. Once you get that opportunity, I agree. It's up to you to do what you need. When you do what you need to do to either keep it or to move up. But everyone doesn't have that access. That's the only thing that I am arguing, is the access.
Well, then we agree. I'm all for access.
Well, how do we get there? That's the problem.
Well, I think we have done an enormous amount. The civil rights laws of the 1960s, which, by the way, as I indicated earlier, were redos of the civil rights laws of the 1870s that were passed by Republicans over the objection of Democrats, like, say, the 1875 Civil Rights Act, which prohibited racial discrimination in public places and public accommodations. That had to be done all over again a century later, because Democrats spent so much time undermining it and setting up Jim Crow laws and Plessy versus Ferguson, this nonsense of separate but equal, that it had to be redone all over the case. So what we've had to do is provide equality of opportunity. And I think we have done that to a considerable degree. We African Americans and Hispanics and all kinds of people are in all kinds of positions. We're already past our first African American president.
Individually, people do well, but as a group, people do not. That cannot be denied. The lack of healthcare access, the lack of the education, public school education, depending on where you are. There are wage disparities. There's employment disparities. And I know you like to beat up the Democrats, but the Republicans now have a stand bearer who, denies the Black Lives Matter movement. That movement was bred out of the police brutality that the Black and brown individuals have been receiving, not recently, but throughout history, by certain police officers.
Well, his hesitation.
The other issues that I'm mentioning. And we all know, just like it's not right to say all cops are bad because of the bad apples that we are now finding on phones and whatnot, it's not fair to blame all of the violence on the Black Lives Matter protesters.
I blame it on Antifa.
Most of them are very, very peaceful, but they have a right to bring awareness to the issues.
Sure.
Trump is not acknowledging them at all. I mean, he hardly even acknowledges racism even anymore.
Well,
And the Republican Party is just going along with him. There's no platform this year.
what I would
What are you even running on?
what I would suggest is that when he, and certainly when I found out that Black Lives Matter was founded by people who consider themselves, in their words, quote unquote, trained Marxists, sorry, Marxism, among many other things, is racist. It's communism. Man, I don't want any part of that. And people in the streets, these are not peaceful protesters.
Most of them are, yes, they are.
Most of them are. But when
Yeah.
you've got, I mean, this is Antifa, frankly, doing this.
No, a lot of these are millennials and people in
And I might add, they're white.
who are. I'm sorry, say that.
I said, and I might add, a lot of Antifa, they're white kids, fairly well-to-do white kids at that.
A lot of these protesters, though, are younger people. I would argue under the age of 40, who are marching and protesting because they want things to stop. They want the police brutality to stop. They want, again, here comes that word, access to the same opportunities that the white friends and colleagues and neighbors have. And that's the part that people are ignoring. The movement is denouncing the violence. And there are unfortunately groups that are coming in and doing the looting and the damage in the name of the protesters to usurp what the movement is about. And
Right.
that has been effective, unfortunately. But it still doesn't take away that the issues that the majority of them are marching on is appropriate. I mean, with everything that's going on, we still have Black and brown men and women being killed unnecessary by certain police officers that's using unnecessary force. I saw on the news today that a cop was finally arrested in Texas. Now, obviously, we'll have to see what happens to the trial. But as you know, most of these police officers, they don't even go to a trial to see what they did was right or wrong. They just get off automatically.
Well, it bothers me that Senator Tim Scott from South Carolina, the first African-American senator from South Carolina and a Republican, went about the serious work of police reform. And for that, he was called by Senator Durbin a quote-unquote token. And they refused to get down to business and do the necessary work to bring the kind of reforms that you and I would support, I assume. I mean, that kind of thing isn't good. Let me give you another issue. Charter schools. And these are the kind of things that you get the politics of teachers' unions involved. And,
well, we have the police unions involved in that.
Well, correct. So I'm suggesting that this is a problem here that the Democratic Party has got to fix internally. Because if you are not going to
let... The police unions are supporting Trump. Not Biden.
Well, now, sure, because the Democratic Party has moved away from supporting police.
No, the Democrat Party moved away from supporting bad police. There we go again. We're grouping. And that's what people do when it benefits their argument. The Democrat Party is not against the police. We are against bad police that choke people to the point where they can't breathe and die. That's what we're against.
All I can tell you is I went to the Trump rally in Harrisburg the other week before all of the virus stuff with the president. And there was an entire set of bleachers filled with police officers with shirts that identified them as police officers. And the head of, and I forget which police union it was, got up on stage and endorsed the president.
I have no doubt.
Huh?
I have no doubt. I have no doubt.
Joe Biden used to get the support of these people. So the question is, why is he not? And
I just told you why. Because he thinks that police officers who misuse their power should be are not above the law.
Well, no one believes in that. I don't believe in that.
No, but
you don't castigate all police.
People that are able to abuse their power. And again, we can at least have trials with these police officers that engage in this type of behavior. Let a judge and jury decide whether or not they're guilty or not. Let's move through the process. We don't even get to that point.
Well, let me ask you a question.
What
I saw
happened in Kentucky with Breonna Taylor. I mean, she was sleeping, and she
in
was,
another room.
and no one is no one is going to be held accountable for her death. That is what people are protesting and upset about.
Well, in that case, let me just say that it was a grand jury. They're going to release the grand jury proceedings.
Yes, because one of the individuals already said that they did not, there was information kept from them. So I'm curious to see when that's released too. The Attorney General is asking for a stay or a delay for some reason, but I'm curious to see what was presented.
And the Attorney General, might I add, is an African American, and he's doing his best to follow the law. That's what his job is. And one of the other, I saw a curious story the other day.
You can't just say that again. Everyone who's African American doesn't agree. So you can't say just because he's African American he did the right thing.
Well, let me just respectfully suggest that my liberal friends insist that, in the famous words of Joe Biden, if you're black and for Trump, you ain't black. They believe that all black Americans are supposed to think the same. And this goes back to my earlier point about the creation of the Democratic Party. It is a culture, a political culture of identifying people by race and then using that to win elections and using it to identify with progressive causes. They've been doing this for 200 years. So what we're seeing now hasn't changed.
I would argue, though, both sides take advantage of their bases. And there is a lot of discussion as to whether or not the Democrat Party does take the black vote for granted, because generally speaking, the black individual Americans do vote Democratic over 90% of the time.
And there's a reason for that. I mean,
and some people believe that, the Republican Party also takes their votes for granted. I know people on both sides who don't vote. And I know people on both sides who aren't going to vote in the election this year because they believe whoever wins, their life isn't going to change. And that's what's unfortunate.
There are always people like that out there.
There are.
Always.
But that's unfortunate.
I hate to say this. I'll admit it. I now have, I think this is I counted one day. I think this is my 18th presidential election. And I don't really remember the first one, which was 1952. But I do remember all of them after that. Even when I was 5, my parents were involved in politics. And
when you said your first election, I thought you meant the one you could vote in.
Oh, no. I mean my first election ever.
Okay.
So that, I guess what I'm saying is from 1952 to this moment, this would be number 18, I guess.
Yeah, Reagan was elected my first election, as far as
man,
yeah,
that's scary.
Yeah, I'm an 80s baby, but
holy cow, you're elected. He's elected, and you're born, and he's elected, and I go to work for him.
But the first
election, I should be hanging it up now.
The first election I could vote in was actually Bush and Gore. And but that election, that is actually what kind of propelled me to want to go into policy and politics.
Well, let me just say, you voted in the wrong state. You should have gone down to Florida and voted.
Well, they should have known how to use their ballots a little bit better.
And frankly, I'm worried. I really am worried about this election and the counting of ballots and all of this. I mean, I think it's already started to go off the rails. I mean, reports of trays of ballots found in a ditch in Wisconsin, and when they had the Georgia primary, they found all these ballots the day after the primary in the post office, unopened. I mean, I just think between honest mistakes and some chicanery, I mean, we, as you probably remember, I think it was in April of this year, we had a Philadelphia Democratic elections judge indicted. And that had nothing to do with mail ballots. That had to do with I mean, I was sort of amused when I read the description. He was standing next to a voting machine, and when people weren't looking, I guess he was going ka-ching, 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 and racking up votes for his favored candidates in a primary, I assume.
And see, my concern is I just want people's votes to count. As you know,
Yes,
Pennsylvania, the Republican Party has a new lawsuit almost every week. The newest one is trying to challenge people's signatures on their absentee and mail-in ballots because, as you know, the signatures are compared to make sure it's valid for that person.
right.
We have issues with the mail. I just see the Republican Party, and I'm only speaking for Pennsylvania, I'm not going to speak for the whole country. But here in Pennsylvania, I do think that the Republican Party is trying to practice voter suppression tactics by not allowing people to vote safely from their homes. I know my mother's going to be voting from home because of the coronavirus. She is not going to go to the polls. Now, me, I am going to the polls, but
Me too.
she has the right not to and to vote from the safety of her home. And it's a shame that we have the Republican Party here in Pennsylvania trying to keep individuals such as her from not doing that.
Well, first of all, I want her to vote. I want her to vote. But there is concern on the Republican side about voter fraud, and voter fraud is voter suppression. If
The
you
problem
are,
is there's no proof of it. That's the problem. And in the past, the Republican parties have benefited the most from mail voting. As a Democrat, we're just catching up. That's what's so interesting.
there's a difference.
Just hurt Democrats. It's not just going to hurt Democrats, it's also going to hurt Republicans as well.
There's a difference between absentee voting and mail-in ballots, in which
Not in
everybody is saying.
Pennsylvania. Not in Pennsylvania. You have to request an absentee and a mail-in ballot. There is no difference. The only
Well, I
is
just
the
we
only
have to be
difference
very,
is
very careful about this. And I noticed that I think I saw this morning that some Pennsylvania Republicans have called for an elections integrity commission. I'd be for that. Have 5 Democrats, 5 Republicans on there and supervise the whole thing. Absolutely, to make sure everything is on the up and up.
well, I do know I can speak for Dauphin County that during the primary when the ballots were scanned with the results that both sides had watchers there that were attorneys to make sure that the process was done fairly.
Good.
And my understanding is that that was done throughout the state, but I can only speak again for Dauphin County. So I do believe that in Pennsylvania, at least, we do have an open, transparent for people to vote by mail. But again, we can't be trying to find ways to throw out people's votes.
No, but they have to be legitimate votes. I mean, this business of ballot harvesting, no one should be coming between your mother and her vote. She should be able to vote, and that's it.
Well, tell the Republican Party to leave her alone.
Well, I mean, somebody shouldn't be coming to the house to collect her ballot.
Well, no, that's illegal. Of course, you have to. In fact, they won't even accept that ballot if you took it down to the elections bureau. I couldn't even deliver her ballot. You would have to deliver it yourself, of course. And I know as a county party chair here in Dauphin County, we're telling people have to deliver their own votes if that's their.
It's just that, Rogette, we have, as Pennsylvanians, we don't have the best history with this. I mean, long before Donald Trump arrived on the scene, I mean, I remember in 1976, I was on the Pennsylvania Ford Dole staff at the Republican State Committee, and they already had a group of attorneys who were looking for voter problems in Philadelphia. Why is it always Philadelphia? I just, but in other words, this kind of thing has been going on for a very long time. I mean, this long predates you and me. I mean, you can find all sorts of rascally stories out there in Pennsylvania history about this. And I just think we need to be candid about that and realize there are always people out there. And frankly, this can be bipartisan. there may be some Republicans out there who are planning to, fool around with things. It should not be allowed, and there should be a way to stop it.
All I know is this election should not be decided in the courts. It should be decided by the American voters. And with that, I want to give you some last words, but
well, we'll get that Supreme Court vacancy filled, and then if it's going to be decided by the court, we'll be fine.
That's the plan. That is the plan, except it's going to be a lot worse than it was in 2000. But you've had, 20 years of practice now to come up with another way of doing.
Well, I just want to say I enjoyed this, and I wish more people would have serious substantive conversations like you and I engage in, not just here, but when we do Battleground PA. I mean, that's a very good thing. That certainly is the way I was raised, and I think you were raised.
Yes.
And so we are going to continue in that vein, period.
The solution is usually somewhere in the middle of the two sides.
Uh-oh, now you're sounding like a moderate Republican.
You keep trying. But thank you for joining me.
You bet. Thanks for having me.